California has given us the green light on developing affordable housing. On today's episode of the Happy House Hacking Podcast, we have a special guest, and we're going to talk about affordable homes, prefabricated homes, and accessory dwelling units, and how you can get those built on your property much quicker. Hello, and welcome back to the Happy House Hacking Podcast, the podcast designed to help young people in California navigate the path to happy home ownership. I am your host, Owen Schwegerle. I'm a realtor, investor, and happy house hacker. And on today's episode, we are going to have a conversation with a special guest about prefabricated homes, ADUs, and some ways you can add accessory dwelling units to your property. So, Daniette, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Owen. Thanks to meet you here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Daniette, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what your background is, and how you got into real estate.
Certainly. I've been a realtor since 2012. I come from a long line of builders and realtors, actually, in my family. I originally hail from Oregon, and up in the Oregon area, I used to be really involved with investors and builders and developers. I've been down in California for about 10 years now, and mostly from seeing how difficult it was to find affordable housing or to be able to develop property. That's really where Joyline Homes was born. So I am a co-founder of Joyline Homes. We're based out of Santa Cruz, California, but we actually sell anywhere within the state of California. And we typically have projects anywhere from Sacramento, Santa Rosa on the Central Coast, all the way down to about Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo currently, with a few builds getting ready to start down in Los Angeles.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Tell us more about prefabricated homes. Like, why a prefab home versus a stick-built home?
Sure. So I come from a background of a long line of site-built construction builders. And here in California especially, that is one of the most complicated and most expensive routes to go. Depending on who you find to build, I feel like that's the biggest variance in quality. And also the timeline can be pretty extensive. So Santa Cruz specifically, we're at almost $800 to $1,000 a square foot to build. Your build has so many different layers of approval. It can take up to 3 years to build is almost normal. What we're typically seeing is I've even heard horror stories of it being almost 5 years to get full development approval. So stepping into the world of being able to do prefabs, that really tightened that window. So I work for a company that we partnered with a really amazing factory that's been around for 40 years. And we actually have about 3 different factories we work with depending on what type of build we're doing. And that actually brings that approval down to about a year.
Wow. So you can get your whole process approved or built within a year.
So actual timeline to be able to build a house on the factory, we sit down with clients and we get to do customization for whatever specs they would like. So we have a really big control window of what we're doing for finishes. But even with very high-end quartz countertops and awesome finishes like brand new custom flooring or exteriors customization like rain screens, we can actually do a build in about 4 months. Wow. So it's a very efficient, streamlined way of processing a build. And it also cuts down on a lot of waste. Instead of individual transport of materials and then having contractors have subcontractors install, we actually have people that are all full-time staff installing these. And we can also order materials at a much larger scale. So usually what we're considering a year of build time, that's to get through the approvals through the permitting departments.
Okay.
So it truly depends on what you have on site for utilities. That's really the way to expedite this, is having your utilities in place.
Okay. Got it. Okay. That is fascinating. And we'll get to that because I'm sure that's a whole nother layer. So when it comes to Joyline coming in, do people typically go for I want to build a home, like I'm going to just build that house outright on this vacant lot? Or are people adding accessory dwelling units in the back? Or what do you see more of?
We're at about a 50-50 split.
Okay.
So a lot of clients that are coming to us, they are either trying to build an accessory dwelling unit in the back of the property on the side yard, or some ability to add a second unit to a property. We do that frequently. The other thing would be up in Santa Cruz, we had a fire called the CZU complex that burnt down 900 houses.
Wow.
So we've also been pretty hands-on with fire rebuilds in the area. So for us, it's been people that had lived in a home long-term. Their home was lost to a fire and they receive an insurance settlement to rebuild their home. But unfortunately, it doesn't usually cover the cost of doing a site build. So It seems to be the most affordable way to be able to rebuild a home is to do a prefabricated unit. And that way it's approved at a state level. And all of the checks and inspections that you have to do for a home is actually done at the factory.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of trying to overburden a local, smaller community for those approvals, we're able to do it at a factory level and actually get it statewide anywhere.
Now, have any of these plans that you guys build out been pre-approved by the county at that level? Like in San Luis Obispo County, for example, they've got some preset plans. Like here's the ADU plan. They've got 4 different size models. I believe it's all stick-built construction, but you can go get the plan quite easily. Has that type of thing happened for any prefabricated homes?
So to step back a little bit and kind of put my touch on that. So the pre-approved plans are typically only for site built. I think that they're an amazing resource for people that are going into a scenario where we can't deliver a prefab to the backyard, let's say, or there is a very interesting slope involved, the extra engineering or something like that's required. Usually what I'm Santa Cruz County, where I hail from, but also a lot of counties we work in, we're very familiar with those plans. But the problem is you still need to bring in an engineer for the lot, and you still are going to go have to source a general contractor to build that home. So it's absolutely saving you the cost of that architecture that needs to be done by an architect. That can be $10,000 to $30,000 per home, but you're still starting at square one when it comes to the build itself. Any of the homes that I'm building, I'm actually using HCD, which is a guideline that the state of California sets out. So before I put a model home on my website, it's already been approved by the state of California. So it basically all of our plans are pre-approved.
Wow.
So you cannot prohibit an HCD build from going on your lot anywhere in the state. And the main reason for that is because we build to a code that supersedes any of the local organizations. This is a umbrella building platform that we do that can go from everything from the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface, to high fire density codes, really energy efficient building procedures to put into play. And then also we try to make sure to match, we want it to feel like a modern home. These aren't manufactured home builds. They don't look like they should go in a manufactured home park. They exceed something called Title 25.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, because if someone hears, oh, it's a prefabricated home, they immediately think, oh, it's just a mobile home. So what is the quality like of these actual homes that Joyline's putting out?
Yeah, so mobile home is an kind of antiquated term. It really changed in 1976. So a lot of manufactured home parks figured out a way to do subpar building to be able to efficiently house people on a very quick level. They used everything from the insulation to the wiring was done on a code that was under what the actual building code is. I specialize not in manufactured home builds that go into manufactured home parks. We're actually building to the state build code of what would be allowed on raw owned land. So that has everything to do with like a more energy efficient windows, really high-end wiring, 2x6 wood exterior frame construction, 2x4 interiors. They're made of real wood. We can deliver a house with just 2 to 3 sections, and it's almost 90% completed when it arrives on site.
Wow.
So that way the finished installation, it usually only takes about a month or so to do that final wrap up. It goes quite a bit quicker. And then we also install into an actual foundation. So there's a permit that's filed that ties it to real property, which changes quite a bit how that's determined.
Totally. Is that the 433A certificate?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. We hit that problem where if it doesn't have that, you can't get conventional financing for buying property. And we just had one like that. It was a mobile home on land without a 433A certificate. Everybody wants to buy it because it was so cool, but you can't get financing traditionally. You need to go through like a land lender or an ag loan, and it's usually more costly.
Yeah, we call that chattel. So it's actually the same as personal property. You're buying something that RV sitting on it.
Exactly. So, that's amazing. So now, what is Joyline's involvement in this process? Like, let's just say somebody wanted to buy a piece of vacant land. Okay, here's this dirt. I'm just going to buy it. I'm just going to park a Joyline on it, and then boom, I'm done. Right?
Yes, that's how we'd like it to be.
Yeah.
Usually we are the first point of contact for a lot of people. It makes sense. Shopping and buying is the funnest part of anything. So you want to shop through your land. You found the first perfect piece of property you're ready to develop. Of course, you want to go pick out which house is going to go on.
Yeah.
So we're used to being that first reference for people to point them in the right direction. Typically, what we're doing is helping determine what's going to be the best First Avenue for them? It'll all depend on the lot itself. So we need to make sure that utilities are in place. And the number one way for most buyers to be starting that process is to work with a land use consultant or a site development team. So we have a few site planners that we work with, and basically what they do is they come out to the property and they help you map out, where's your driveway going to go? Where are we going to put a septic tank? Where are we going to put a well? Let's determine how many homes and ADUs we're going to add to the property. Do we need to demolish or renovate any existing structures to make that happen? That's really the process of how it starts. So some of our builds will contact us and they still haven't even started with a septic tank yet. We're happy to put them in contact with those people to get them started.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So if it's raw land, no septic, no well, power's available at the street, what point do you guys step in and help out?
So we like to be an all-in-one shop. So we have general contractors that are pretty much spread all over the place. Usually somebody reaching out to Joyline Homes that wants to get started on that process, we're pretty hands-on to make sure that they get guided properly. Even if they determine they wanted to put a 1,600 square foot house, we find out they can only put a 1,200 square foot house, we want to be able to help guide them throughout that process. So I have quite a few different clients right now, for example. They're all working with different stages of general contractors, site planners, and land use consultants that are all prepping their lot. So Joyline Homes themselves, we are actually home suppliers. So what I'm trying to do is ensure that you can walk through all the stages that you need to be ready for that home to be delivered to your site. So anything that falls in that capacity, we're happy to help guide.
Cool. Okay. That's fantastic. So now let's say you've got all utilities stubbed to the property. It's pretty much ready to go. Let's say this lot had that all equipped. It's city water, city sewer, and just easier to get going.
That is the ideal scenario.
Okay. So those lots you probably pay more for, obviously. There's a little premium if it's got the utilities subbed out. And then it's still vacant, no plans, but it's ready, ripe for development. Someone comes in, they bought that lot or they own that lot. Now they come in, okay, let's get the plans, engineering, foundation, and then put in.
Yeah, so I'm usually partnering those people immediately with a land use consultant.
Okay.
Land use consultants, what they do, what their role is, they help you get the permits to get permission to build your home. So they're ensuring that anything is met for the county when it comes to environmental regulations or restrictions. They're ensuring that the utilities are prepared properly, and they start the work to build your foundation. So the foundation is something that can be done simultaneously to the house being built offsite. So when we're at the stage that we have utilities ready to go, we can absolutely start to order your home. So right now, my factory is at about a 3-month queue. So I let the factory know what model is about to be built. We do paperwork to get ready for that. We put that into escrow, and those funds are either released from cash if somebody's a cash buyer, or we work with the lender. We have a few lenders that we work with that can help these types of builds. And then the house is usually ready to build in about 3-4 months, and it only takes about 4 weeks for us to fully assemble it, and then it's delivered to the site. So in the scenario that a general contractor is building the stub outs for those utilities, they're putting in the new power pole for PG&E, they're putting in the driveway or grading some type of a level to put in a foundation, and we try to simultaneously do the build that the foundation and all the stub outs will be ready at the same time the home is built. But I do also have the capacity that I can move the house to storage while we wait for some of those items to be finished.
Okay, well, that's good. So if it's taken longer to get power from PG&E or somebody, you've got a storage spot somewhere.
Exactly. Yep. And that way we can kind of keep everything efficiently moving on as possible, and we're not waiting on Joyline Homes for any stage of that.
That's awesome. So now explain to us a little bit, let's say someone maybe owns the land and has a house already on it that they're living in. Maybe let's talk about ADU laws, tiny homes. What's the difference between an ADU and a tiny home? And then we'll dive into some of the laws around ADUs and tiny homes.
Certainly. So an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit to a primary home. So anytime there's a main primary residence and you'd like to build a second home, now you fall under ADU category. So an ADU in the state, there's a few different definitions for them, but the main thing to think about is that it's going to be somewhere between 800 square feet to about 1,200 square feet. It's going to be based on whether you're in the city or in the county, or regardless of what area that you're going to be in, over what size you can be able to build. So when it comes to ADU law, there's quite a few exciting changes that have been happening with the law right now. We're really pro-build, and as long as you can get utilities to be provided for those units, you have the ability to build up to 2 ADUs plus a converted ADU plus a junior ADU per parcel. So that's in addition to your primary home. When it comes to tiny homes is a different category. So that's much smaller. That's usually 400 square feet to 700 square feet. Truly, a tiny home is a junior ADU, or it's just a smaller version of an ADU. It's going to be outside of your main primary unit. It's just going to be a much smaller living space. So tiny homes is the only area that becomes a little gray because it depends on your county. So in Santa Cruz, for example, we allow tiny homes on wheels. Do not need to put it on a permanent foundation, but you do have to have some type of a wastewater treatment. You've got to have electric, you've got to have water. You can actually buy a park model or a tiny home on wheels. It can be 400 square feet, and you can just park it and put up skirting, and that actually qualifies as an ADU. San Luis Obispo does not allow tiny homes on wheels, and if you do a tiny home, it needs to be put on a permanent foundation. So it's going to be more ADU law that's going to be applicable for most of those areas.
Gotcha. Okay. So, let's go back to that ADU law. You said there have been changes. So they allow up to 2 ADUs plus a converted ADU plus what was the other one?
So they're called statewide exemption ADUs. So statewide exemption ADUs. And so you're allowed to do 1 statewide exemption ADU, 1 statewide conversion ADU. That's when you have a basement or a garage space that you're skirting. So previously non-inhabitable, you're turning it into habitable space. You're also allowed to do 1 non-exempt ADU. It's also a detached unit. It has to do with setbacks and what they're requiring for the size. And then you can also do a junior ADU. A junior ADU is when you're dividing off habitable space from primary residence. So perhaps you're turning a house with 3 bedrooms. You're making a 1-bedroom, 1-bath unit out of that main house. That's a junior ADU.
Yeah.
So a junior ADU, has the most flexibility with how you're dividing it off. But the main thing to know is to make a junior ADU, there's an owner occupancy requirement. So you need to either live in the junior unit or you need to live in the primary home.
So with that in mind, can it be like drywalled off to be its own separate contained unit, or does there still need to be access from the main house to the junior ADU?
Great question. To do a junior ADU, you can do either. But if you're going to have it completely drywalled off from the main unit, you need to have at least some type of a kitchenette. It doesn't need to be a full-size kitchen, but you need to have a bathroom and a kitchen. But if you are in a situation where you're just trying to separate off like a bedroom and a bathroom, as long as they have access to the main house for the kitchen, then you're allowed to do it that way as well.
And what is the benefit of that? Like, why call that a JADU if they're still using the kitchen of the main house?
That's the fun gray areas of California. So they're trying their best to not prohibit people that aren't in a situation to add a second kitchen. That's truly what it comes down to.
For costs purposes?
For costs, exactly.
Okay.
So if you wanted to have a second unit and you want it to feel like you can rent something out, you want to subsidize your mortgage, they're just basically giving an allowance that they will recognize that as a junior ADU. But it is more similar to like a roommate situation at that point when you're giving them access to the main house. So in most cases, what we see for people that are doing that type of a converted space, you are absolutely trying to make it a whole separate apartment without access to the main.
Gotcha. And there's a permitting process for that in order to go through it. Okay. And then we converted our garage to an ADU. So we're very familiar with the conversions. We're very like gung-ho about converting space, basements, garages, whatever you can, convert it, rent it out, help pay your bills.
Absolutely.
So I like that. And now you said there's up to 2 ADUs. Now, are those detached ADUs that you could build as well? Or
yes, those are. So if you're doing a conversion, that basically counts as your attached ADU. You can also do a junior ADU. That's part of an attached. But then when it comes to detached, you can do a statewide exemption ADU. And so that one goes up to 800 square feet, 4-foot setbacks, up to 20 feet tall of a build to match whatever the primary residence is. And then you can also do a non-exempt ADU, and that's where they can go a little bit bigger. Then it has to do with 10% of the parcel coverage, and you can go up to 1,200 square feet.
Oh, cool. Now, when there's a lot of different options here. So if you have a standard single family parcel, how many units total are we talking about they could add here between all these ADUs, JADUs, and
Yeah, technically, it really depends on the lot, how much
Yeah.
space you have. I would say that this is why we love land use consultants
Mm-hmm.
and site planners because they are able to most efficiently utilize any lot that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do up to 4. You can do the junior ADU, the conversion, plus basically 2 detached units. What we're commonly seeing, though, just to be totally upfront with people, I think you really want to look into your utilities. Right now, we are requiring that all new ADUs that are built, they usually have to have their own separate panel for property. So you're going to be capped eventually on what does your pole allow and or
Mm-hmm.
what are we going to need to add. The other thing that can really be a hindrance, not to derail us, but it's going to be what's going on with your waste. Like, do you need to have a septic tank? And that septic tank needs to make sense for how many units you're going to be building there. So typically when you're developing a raw piece of land and you're building from scratch and they build that primary residence, the septic tank is made to match what the size of that home is. So a
Mm-hmm.
3-bedroom, 2-bath house, 1,600 square foot, that's how big a septic tank is. So if you'd like to add a single, just one ADU to it, you need to either be able to expand that size or you need to upgrade to an engineered system.
Got it. So I believe in our area, what I've heard is oftentimes they have to add another septic system
Mhm.
in order to accommodate an ADU build out. So,
And we've seen that, or they can expand existing systems. It really just depends on their
yeah.
lot too, because if you're in an area where you're really trying to maximize your density, I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times if you don't have that extra quarter-acre lot to make a larger drain field or a leach field, it's going to make a lot more sense to upgrade to an engineered system that can handle a lot more waste.
Totally. Now, what about multifamily laws? This one,
Sure.
I heard about this. I got really excited about it, and I wanted to ask you, 8 units or something up to for multifamily you can add.
Yeah.
So tell us more about this law. What's going on? And
Yeah, that's a really exciting one. So that's SB 1211. And so this passed in September of 2024. What it's trying to do is streamline the process for getting ADU approvals. We don't want people to apply for ADUs and for it to get stuck in litigation. The state is really trying to push things through. So you're really supposed to hear back within 6 months for approval or denials. With this 1211, what they're trying to do is create a multifamily ability to add additional units of it. So each unit of a multifamily property is allowed to have its own separate detached unit, but you cannot exceed the amount of ADUs to the amount of primaries, if that makes sense.
so if you have a fourplex, you could add 4 ADUs.
Exactly.
If you had an eightplex, you could add 8 ADUs.
Exactly. But if you've got 10 plex, you can only add 8.
Got it. Okay, so there is the 8 is the cap.
8 is the cap, exactly. And that's what they're trying to do right now is to cap it at that.
Yeah, I know. I heard in San Diego there's people buying up and then building 8 units on top of whatever's there, and it's just wow,
Yes.
going really dense, going heavy.
Which I think we always get a little bit of flack from both sides. We want to see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of development. We don't want to see overdevelopment. So I think that this is really trying to match. I think the state is doing a great job saying this is already zoned for multifamily. We already want high density there. That's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely where we should be focusing on additional builds.
Totally. Okay, so tell us more about how somebody goes about buying a Joyline home. Like, let's start out with someone who already owns a parcel that's got the house, and then they're like, "Hey, I've been listening to the Happy House Hacking podcast. I want some rental income to help pay my bills. I want to build an ADU in my backyard so that way I can have some rental income to go help pay the mortgage." What would that person do?
Certainly. So there's a few routes for people to go. I'd say the most common that we see is for people that have enough equity in their property, home equity line of credit. Amazing. Best rates for it. It doesn't change your current mortgage. You're basically getting a smaller second mortgage to cover the cost of the rebuild. So you can use those for conversions. You can use it for a detached or an attached ADU. You can even use that for a junior ADU creation as needed. So that gives you the most flexibility and it really makes it so the lender allows you to kind of have full discrepancy over how you like to
Mm-hmm.
do things. You also have a lot more control of how you're doing site plans and working with permits and general contractors. The lender really doesn't get involved with your planning. They're just granting you the funds based on your equity and your credit. The other way that we're seeing is there's a few different lenders that we use here in SLO County. We really like Murphy Bank. They're amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out Conrad. He's amazing.
Yes, I went to Cal Poly with him. He's really awesome.
He's great. And he's very creative when they come to things. We also use Land Home Financial is fantastic. Cross Country Mortgage. There's quite a few different routes to go. that they can look at the current equity that you have. And even if it's not sizable enough to borrow against, they can basically use that as collateral to grant you funds to build a secondary dwelling on the property.
How's that work? It sounds like a line of credit. What's
Yeah,
the
it's
difference?
a line of credit, but what they're actually doing is a wraparound mortgage. They're actually changing your mortgage rate. So you're basically doing a refinance at new funds.
So it's like a cash out.
Exactly.
Got it. So you're just pulling cash out versus having the line of credit.
Exactly. And they're usually helping you sponsor the build. So to be able to go through, they have caps on how much you can borrow. And basically you're chatting with your lending officer to help you figure out what your approval rates are for. But we see both routes of going for sure. It really the depend on like the down payment is considerably less when you're going either of those routes. It's a little bit more difficult for somebody that doesn't own land, but there are still ways. Land Home Financial and Murphy, they do have a program that allows you to borrow money to acquire the land as well. But that's usually you're going to come out with a bigger down payment to be
on the front end. Okay. So someone could go the financing. I'm going to buy this land. I've got my 30% or 50% down payment, put that up and get the loan to finance the rest of the purchase. And then that same lender would give them the loan to go through, buy the manufactured home and put it on the property.
Modular or manufactured. And then they do a wraparound to combine it into one mortgage at the
Then
end.
do
Or you can
refi into a new conventional home loan type product at the end.
Those ones you just, the main thing to weigh out is they want things to be done within a certain time period because there is a cap on how long they can loan you those funds. You're going to need to be able to do this project within about a year. In some most cases, you're kind of like pushing it up right to the end of how long it takes to be able to get your utilities granted.
Yeah, that's a tough timeline because getting it done in a year, maybe it lingers with something that you can't control.
Absolutely. And so that's what we kind of try to help people be educated about on the beginning so that they can kind of figure out all their routes and all their options and see what makes the most sense for them.
For sure. Okay. And is there any other financing options? Like does Joyline provide financing?
No, we just work with lenders. We're not quite that big of a company. We're not trying to finance the builds. We have quite a few in different spots, but there are definitely private money investors. There are a lot of real estate investment trust organizations that are lending money that way. A lot of times, if you have the lot itself, that's the main thing that they want. Anybody who's loaning you money, they want to know what kind of a collateral you have on the backside. When it comes to financing a manufactured home build, they are not so worried about you defaulting on that piece of it because they know that piece can always be sold off even if it's never installed onto your property.
Gotcha.
But if you don't even have a piece of land and you're trying to like do this all from scratch, that's usually where it's the most difficult.
Okay. And then how many people are actually going this route right now? Like Joyline Homes, how many people are going through installing, building ADUs or primary homes through?
Yeah, right now I'd say it's we're seeing a lot of push for it. So the main thing is like how many people we can help at a certain amount of time. Right now we're at about a dozen a year of houses that we're building, but across like the last 2 years has really been exploding. So like I have 6 projects that all started within the last month. They're all people at different stages of the build. So we've been doing this since 2019. When we first started, our main focus was being able to do fire rebuilds. So some of those clients were 2 to 3 years to be able to do their build because we were waiting on things called like the DEQ cleanout. We have to make sure that the site has had all hazardous materials removed from the build. So before you can even start construction of anything, we have to make sure it's safe for you, the contractors, everybody else on site. So I think when we're going into LA, that's kind of what we're looking at as well, is we're going to have a lot of people that are starting the process, but it doesn't happen overnight. Everybody's kind of trying to push this forward as fast as they can, but there's probably so many contractors that they can help at a time. So
yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, there's such a need for it right now.
Yes. If you were curious, it just in the last 5 years, California has built 80,000 ADUs. So I definitely say there's a good motivation to keep it going.
Yeah, that's great. I know in our small town of San Luis Obispo, I know that the number of ADUs over by like Cal Poly, for example, has cropped up like 200 plus units in just like a 2 to 3 year time frame because they need housing. There's just so many people, not enough places for people to sleep. So I think ADUs, statewide are going to help us a lot. And how do you see the future of California real estate playing out? I know that we have this need. There is this huge demand for housing. And where do you see Joyline Homes in that solution?
So I mentioned earlier what it costs to do site build construction and what that process is. For all of the builds that I'm starting this year, for example, I'm closer to about $250 a square foot, down from almost $1,000 a square foot.
Yeah.
They're built to the exact same code as a site-built home. They're built with a lot less waste. They joke that a manufactured or a modular home, you measure the waste in a garbage can and not a dumpster. So for me, I really feel like that's the main push for me, is to kind of help be able to keep things cost sensitive and be efficient as possible for the environment. So I really see that that's going to be the biggest movement moving forward. It doesn't make any sense to have individual shipping of materials out to a site, having it sit out in the weather, and then hiring each individual contractor to do each piece of the build. There's just that is the scariest thing for me. That's what takes the longest.
Yeah.
And I feel for people that are kind of trying to do it piecemeal to save money, but I really think in the end they end up paying 3 times as more than they think they're going to. So I definitely see, for me, I've got a very strong passion for manufactured modular builds. I really think this is the building path of the future. There's also a really interesting new code that passed that's for condoization that I love. It actually exists in Oregon already, surprisingly enough, for the last few years. But here we call it the AB 1033. And so that passed back in October of 2023, and it's been taking a little while. They passed it on a state level, and then they allowed cities to opt in how they chose to move forward with it. So what that means is that you can build an ADU on your parcel and you can sell it separate from your main home. So I think that opens up some pretty amazing routes for people. We already had some really great laws on the books to help people to divide their lots. SB 9 was one, and SB 450 was off of SB 9. It tries to help if somebody has, let's say, a 2-acre parcel. They can retain 60% of the parcel and they can sell off 40%. And that's great for new land out there, but it doesn't really help somebody that perhaps needs to build and they're going to start from scratch and trying to finance the lot purchase plus utilities plus the home. So this new way of doing a condoization, you can have a lot with a primary home, and you can use a lot more financing avenues that a normal lot developer would have on their access, and you can build off an ADU, and you can either move into the ADU and sell off your main house or vice versa. But now that you can build off, let's say you're going to build 2 ADUs, you can basically make yourself like a small subdivision to be able to sell off, which is a great way to keep ownership in the hands of everyone.
Do you have to set up some sort of CCNR's management committee to make sure that the lots are maintained, or the common areas, or?
Yeah, so it all depends on the municipality that you're in right now. So
Mhm.
Santa Cruz has their own that they're trying to get approved right now. LA and Santa Monica both opted in as well. They have
Mhm.
and San Diego right now, they're waiting on their last provisions to be able to allow it. And I know San Diego and Encinitas, they're waiting on basically they're fine tuning how they want that HOA to be drawn
Wow.
up. So you have a common area where you have, let's say, parking for everyone, and how you're going to be dealing with weeds, that
Right.
type of stuff. But being able to have shared utilities is massive. That was the issue that we saw with SB 9,
Mhm.
because if we had a single parcel that we were trying to add 2 septic tanks to and be able to build ADUs, that became very preventative for a lot of people. There's just not that much land for those items. And then dealing with PG&E, having to have separate power service for each home and ADU got to be really difficult. And so now you can basically set it up as a subdevelopment, have one utility, and build your homes off of that. Is fantastic.
How do they pay utilities? Do they split it up, or how's that?
You would put that into that HOA. So it's a common use, very similar to think of like a condo.
Yeah.
So if you have like a 4 apartment dwelling and you want to divide that off, and maybe one unit is a 2-bedroom and one is a 1 unit, that's how you just put that together in your HOA to be
Wow.
fair.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that the main I everybody touts affordable housing, and I think affordable housing is great. And there's definitely people that need to rent. You would have to have rentals for places.
Yeah.
So I think this condoization really helps that ability for people to make more rentals. But my favorite part is that it can create more homeownership opportunities for people.
Totally. That's really cool. Now, you mentioned that there's like a owner occupant requirement for JADUs.
Mhm.
You're only allowed to do the extra unit while you're living in it as your primary.
Mhm.
So what happens if you move? You sell the house someday, move out, or if you just kept it in your portfolio as a rental, what happens to that JADU?
So the JADU would just be sold and conveyed with the main dominant property. So they passed this new thing back in September of 2023, and it's AB 976. So to not nerd out too much about it, but there used to be a block that some communities would elect to have and say, if you're going to build an ADU on the parcel, you need to have one of them owner occupied. And so that was a requirement that some communities were using to basically prevent ADUs from being built. And the state stepped in and said, no, that's not the way that we'd like to see things done. If an investor that has maybe deeper pockets is able to do this, we want to encourage that investor to build additional units as well. So there was a ban in place that was supposed to expire this year in 2025. And now with this new AB 976, it was repealed. So that ban is for life now. They can never require the accessory dwelling units to be non-rental based. So the only one that was carved out of this is actually the junior ADUs. And similar to your point that you brought up in the beginning when it came to junior ADUs, you can imagine it would get a little dicey if you rent out a room and you have to share a kitchen with somebody you don't know or somebody that you feel uncomfortable with. That's why they chose to carve that out.
Got it.
This new
I can
regulation.
see. Yeah. Now, what about with SB9? There's like a affidavit you sign that says I'm also intending to live in this dwelling.
Yes.
So
For 3 years.
how do they go about enforcing that, following up on that, making sure that those types of things are followed?
So it really it falls down to the local governments to be able to do that. SB9, when it passed, they were actually responding to community concern. What most of the communities were vocal about is they didn't want to see a bunch of developers buy up all the land, divvy it all up, and resell it. And so what they did is they put out a little provision that says this is not intended for investors. This is for homeowners that are dividing off their own parcels that they own, that they live on site in the primary residence. So now there's a requirement that for 3 years you need to remain a homeowner during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great provision that they added in, especially to address any concern. I would love it if the community is embracing of new housing as it needs to be built to really accommodate the needs that we have as a society.
Wow. Now, are there any other updates or changes in the law that we haven't covered and that maybe we should share with the audience? Just anything new that you've heard of that I'm just like blown away. There's so much new stuff I'm learning. Like, wow, I didn't even know about these extra changes. So,
Yeah, there's a lot. I think we've covered a lot of the big ones. I'd say the main thing is the path is wide open for how many homes you're going to be able to build now. Having that restriction on how many ADUs you could have, or needing to live in one of them before you could build an ADU, or needing to keep ownership of both units at one time, a lot of that stuff has all been lifted. So the biggest, craziest changes are definitely this full green light ahead to help start building these ADUs. There are a few things to mention. All ADUs need to be all electric. They really want to phase out natural gas in the state. So make sure that those provisions make sense. Putting in a new amp panel, for example, making sure that PG&E is on board with the new ampage that's going to be pulled. The other one is that if you did not go the Joyline route, you didn't go prefab, you're going to do like an attached ADU or you're going to do a site built ADU, you need to have solar. You do not need solar for anything that's done manufactured or prefab.
seriously, wow.
So it's pretty
Some savings.
Absolutely. And the other big one to kind of note is that the sprinklers, if the main unit has sprinklers, your ADU also needs to have sprinklers. But even in the scenario where you're building 2 detached new homes, you do not need to have sprinklers on this anymore. So that was something that they tried to pass through and it basically was rejected.
Wow.
So now it just makes everything more affordable. I'd love for everything to be as fireproof as possible moving forward, but we also want to know that it's not everybody's ability to cover that with a budget. It's just extra cost that everybody might have to
Totally.
incur.
Yeah. So, Daniette, where would somebody go if they wanted to learn more about Joyline Homes?
Yeah, please go to our website, joylinehomes.com. We also, we build pretty actively right now, and we try to keep our website as up to date as possible with new models. We're pretty inclusive with pricing, so all in, you can see what the cost of a model is. We really like to disclose and educate people to help as much as possible. You also can see cost breakdowns of what our estimate of what it'd be to install on site and to deliver, so everything's pretty transparent. And then I would say the number one way for people to really get educated on this, knowing that you probably have a reach much bigger than just SLO or Santa Cruz County, I highly recommend checking out the county build websites. There are incredible abilities. We have seen really good credits that have been offered to homeowners. We've seen discounts on permitting. There's a lot of avenues that really help people out. It's really the direction everyone's trying to go right now.
That is awesome. Well, Daniette, thank you so much for coming on today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. If you found value in this episode, please share it with a friend, like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. And thanks so much for watching, everyone. Make it a great day.